The forest was thick with shadows as the moon hung low in the October sky. Marcus Thompson pulled his worn sleeping bag tighter around his shoulders, listening to the distant sounds of the wilderness. He had been hiking the Alaskan backcountry for 3 days, following old logging trails that most people had forgotten. His campfire crackled softly, casting dancing light on the surrounding pine trees. Marcus was a wildlife photographer who spent months each year in remote locations, capturing images of animals in their natural habitat. This trip was different, though. He wasn't here for work. After losing his job at the Nature magazine 6 months ago, he needed time to think about his future. The wilderness had always been his sanctuary, the place where his mind found peace. As he settled down for the night, Marcus didn't notice the yellow eyes watching him from the darkness beyond his camp. A large gray wolf stood motionless between 2 massive trees, its nose twitching as it caught the unfamiliar human scent. The wolf's name was Ghost, though no human had ever given him that name. The other wolves in his pack called him that because of his ability to move through the forest without making a sound. Ghost was the alpha male of a pack of 7 wolves. They had been hunting for 2 days without success. The caribou herds had moved further north than usual, and the smaller prey animals seemed to have vanished. Winter was approaching fast, and the pack needed to build up their strength for the harsh months ahead. Behind Ghost, 6 other wolves waited in the shadows. There was Storm, Ghost's mate, and the alpha female, whose black fur made her nearly invisible in the darkness. Silver and Scout were their grown children from last spring, both strong and eager to prove themselves as hunters. Then came the 3 younger wolves, Frost, River, and Dawn, who were still learning the ways of the pack. The wolves had caught Marcus's scent hours ago. They had been following him since late afternoon, staying downwind and keeping their distance. This was their territory, and humans rarely ventured this deep into the wilderness. Ghost had decided they would watch and wait. The humans seemed to be alone, but wolves had learned to be careful around humans. Sometimes they brought danger. Marcus threw another piece of wood on the fire and settled back against his backpack. He pulled out his journal and began writing about the day's journey. The trail had been harder than expected, with fallen trees blocking the path and thick undergrowth making progress slow. But the beauty of the untouched forest made every difficult step worth it. As he wrote, Marcus felt a strange sensation, as if he was being watched. He looked up from his journal and scanned the edge of his firelight. The forest seemed quiet, almost too quiet. Usually, there would be the sounds of small animals moving through the underbrush, or the call of an owl in the distance. Tonight, everything was silent. Ghost stepped closer, moving from tree to tree like a shadow. His pack followed, spread out in a wide arc around the humans' camp. They weren't planning to attack. Wolves rarely bothered humans unless they were desperate or protecting their young. But they were curious about this lone traveler in their domain. Storm positioned herself on the opposite side of the camp from Ghost. Her dark fur blended perfectly with the night shadows. She had given birth to cubs just 4 months ago, and her maternal instincts were strong. The humans' presence near their territory made her nervous, but she trusted Ghost's judgment. Silver and Scout moved to flank the camp from the north and south. As young adults, they were eager to show their hunting skills, but they also knew the importance of patience. Their parents had taught them that the best hunters were those who could wait for the perfect moment. The 3 youngest wolves, Frost, River, and Dawn, stayed further back. At just over a year old, they were old enough to hunt with the pack, but still young enough to make mistakes. Their curiosity about the human was strong, but they had learned to follow their elders' lead. Marcus closed his journal and lay down in his sleeping bag. The fire would burn for a few more hours, giving him warmth and light through the early part of the night. He had camped alone in the wilderness hundreds of times and felt comfortable in the forest. Nature had always felt more like home to him than any city ever had. As sleep began to take hold, Marcus heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was the long, haunting howl of a wolf, echoing through the forest like a ghostly song. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then, one by one, other voices joined in, creating a chorus that filled the night air. Ghost had begun to howl to communicate with his pack and to announce their presence to other wolves in the area. It was a sound as old as the wilderness itself, a call that spoke of unity, territory, and the wild spirit that could never be tamed. Marcus sat up in his sleeping bag, his heart racing. He had heard wolves howl before, but never this close. The sound seemed to surround his camp, suggesting that he was in the middle of a wolf pack's territory. He knew that wolves generally avoided humans, but he also knew that a pack protecting their territory could be dangerous. The howling continued for several minutes, with each wolf adding their voice to the ancient song. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the forest fell silent again. Marcus strained his ears, listening for any sound that might tell him where the wolves had gone. Ghost signaled to his pack with a low growl that only they could hear. The wolves began to move, circling the camp in a wide pattern that would allow them to observe the human without being seen. They were not hunting him, but they wanted to understand what he was doing in their territory. As the hours passed, Marcus dozed fitfully, waking at every small sound. The fire burned lower and lower until only glowing embers remained. In the darkness, he could occasionally see pairs of yellow eyes reflecting the dim light, appearing and disappearing like stars in a cloudy sky. The wolves maintained their watch throughout the night. They moved silently through the forest, taking turns to observe the sleeping human. Ghost and Storm had decided that as long as the human showed no aggressive behavior, they would leave him alone. But they would not abandon their vigilance. As dawn approached, something unexpected happened. The three youngest wolves, Frost, River, and Dawn, began to feel drowsy. They had been awake for nearly 20 hours, following the hunt that had started the previous morning. Their young bodies needed rest, and the warmth radiating from the dying embers of the human's fire was inviting. River was the first to lie down. She found a soft patch of moss about 30 feet from Marcus's camp and curled up in a tight ball. Her brother Frost soon joined her, and then Dawn settled down nearby. The three young wolves fell into a deep sleep, exhausted from the long hunt and the night of watching. Ghost and Storm noticed their children's absence, but were not immediately concerned. Young wolves often needed more sleep than adults, and the area seemed safe enough. The human had shown no signs of being a threat, sleeping peacefully through the night. As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the forest canopy, Marcus started to wake up. The cold mountain air made him reluctant to leave his warm, sleeping bag, but his internal clock told him it was time to start the day. He had always been an early riser, preferring to break camp and begin hiking while the morning air was still cool and fresh. Marcus stretched and sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He looked around his camp, checking that everything was secure. His backpack was where he had left it, hanging from a tree branch to keep it away from small animals. His camera equipment was safely stored in waterproof cases. As he began to emerge from his sleeping bag, Marcus froze. About 20 feet away, barely visible in the morning shadows, he could see what looked like 3 sleeping animals. His first thought was that they might be dogs, perhaps belonging to other hikers in the area. But as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he realized the truth. They were wolves. 3 young wolves were sleeping peacefully near his camp, their bodies curled up like domestic dogs napping in a sunny yard. Marcus had never seen anything like it. In all his years of wildlife photography, he had never been this close to wild wolves, and he had certainly never seen them sleeping so peacefully near a human camp. Marcus reached slowly for his camera, moving with the careful precision he had learned from years of photographing wild animals. Any sudden movement could wake the wolves and potentially create a dangerous situation. But the opportunity to capture images of wild wolves in such a relaxed state was too rare to pass up. As he quietly prepared his camera, Marcus wondered about the rest of the pack. Young wolves rarely traveled alone, which meant there were likely adult wolves somewhere nearby. He scanned the surrounding forest, but could see no other animals. The adult wolves had positioned themselves where they could watch both their sleeping young and the human, but they remained invisible in the dense forest. The morning light grew stronger, illuminating the peaceful scene. The three young wolves slept soundly, their breathing creating small puffs of vapor in the cool air. They looked innocent and beautiful, nothing like the fierce predators that many people imagine when they thought of wolves. Marcus managed to take several photographs, working as quietly as possible. Each image captured a moment that few humans had ever witnessed. Wild wolves at complete rest, trusting enough in their safety to sleep deeply. It was a scene that challenged everything most people believed about the relationship between humans and wolves. As the sun climbed higher, one of the young wolves began to stir. It was River, the female, who was always the first awake. She opened her yellow eyes slowly, blinking in the morning light. For a moment, she seemed confused about where she was. Then, her nose caught the human scent, and she became fully alert. River's movement woke her brothers, Frost and Dawn. All three young wolves sat up, looking around in confusion. They had fallen asleep without thinking about their location, and now they found themselves very close to the human they had been watching during the night. Marcus held his breath, waiting to see what the wolves would do. He knew that frightened animals could be unpredictable, and he didn't want to make any movement that might trigger a defensive response. The three young wolves looked at him with curious rather than fearful expressions, as if they were trying to understand what kind of creature he was. For several minutes, human and wolves regarded each other in silence. It was a moment of connection across species, a brief understanding that transcended the usual barriers between wild animals and humans. Marcus felt privileged to be part of such an encounter, knowing that it was something that might never happen again in his lifetime. Slowly, the three young wolves stood up and stretched, just like domestic dogs waking from a nap. They showed no fear of Marcus, but they also showed no aggression. They seemed to understand that this strange creature posed no immediate threat to them. From the forest around the camp, Ghost and Storm watched their children's interaction with the human. They were ready to intervene if necessary, but they sensed no danger from the lone traveler. The human's calm behavior and lack of threatening movements told them that he understood and respected their presence. The young wolves began to move away from the camp, heading toward the sounds of their parents calling softly from the forest. They walked slowly, occasionally looking back at Marcus as if memorizing his appearance. It was clear that this encounter had been as remarkable for them as it was for him. As the wolves disappeared into the forest, Marcus sat back against his backpack, overwhelmed by what he had just experienced. In 30 years of working with wildlife, he had never had such an intimate encounter with wild predators. The photographs he had taken would be valuable, but the memory of those peaceful moments would be priceless. The forest seemed different now, less threatening and more welcoming. Marcus realized that the wolves had been watching him all night, and their behavior told him that he was accepted, if only temporarily, in their world. It was a feeling of connection to the wilderness that he had never experienced before. As he began to pack his gear for another day of hiking, Marcus found himself hoping for another encounter with the wolf pack. He knew it was unlikely, but the possibility added excitement to his journey through their territory. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the forest and beginning what would become an extraordinary day in the wilderness. Marcus had no idea that his encounter with the wolves was just the beginning of an adventure that would change his understanding of the relationship between humans and wild animals forever. Marcus spent the morning breaking camp and preparing for another day of hiking through the Alaskan wilderness. The encounter with the three young wolves had left him feeling energized and more connected to the forest than ever before. He moved through his routine with extra care, respecting the fact that he was a guest in wolf territory. As he shouldered his backpack and began walking down the trail, Marcus didn't notice that he was still being watched. Ghost and Storm had made a decision during the early morning hours. Instead of driving the human away from their territory, they would continue to observe him. The stranger had shown respect for their young, and his behavior suggested that he posed no threat to the pack. The wolves followed Marcus at a distance throughout the morning. They moved through the forest like shadows, using their knowledge of the terrain to stay hidden while keeping the human in sight. It was unusual behavior for a wolf pack, but these were unusual circumstances. Silver and Scout took turns running ahead to scout the trail, making sure there were no other humans or potential dangers in Marcus's path. The young adult wolves were curious about where the human was going and why he was traveling alone through their territory. Frost, River, and Dawn followed behind their parents, still sleepy from their early morning adventure. They had been scolded by Storm for sleeping so close to a stranger, but she hadn't been truly angry with them. Their peaceful encounter with the human had proven that he was not a threat. Around midday, Marcus stopped beside a small creek to rest and eat lunch. The clear mountain water looked inviting, and he knelt down to fill his water bottles. As he worked, he heard a rustling in the bushes across the creek. Looking up, he saw Silver standing at the edge of the forest, watching him with obvious curiosity. The young wolf made no attempt to hide. She stood in plain sight, her gray and white fur beautiful in the dappled sunlight. Marcus and Silver looked at each other across the narrow creek, both trying to understand the other's intentions. Slowly, Marcus reached for his camera. Silver watched his movements, but didn't seem alarmed. She had observed him using the strange black object that morning and had seen that it posed no danger. Marcus managed to capture several images of the beautiful young wolf before she turned and melted back into the forest. Ghost had been watching the interaction from deeper in the woods. His daughter's bold behavior concerned him slightly, but he had to admit that the human continued to show no aggressive intentions. The stranger seemed content to observe and photograph, asking for nothing more from the wolves than their tolerance of his presence. After finishing his lunch, Marcus continued down the trail. The path wound through dense forest, past ancient trees that had stood for hundreds of years. He felt a deep sense of peace in this untouched wilderness, far from the noise and stress of human civilization. Unknown to Marcus, the wolf pack was facing their own challenges. They had not made a successful hunt in 3 days. The caribou herds they usually depended on had moved further north than expected, and other prey animals seemed scarce. Winter was approaching, and the wolves needed to find food soon to maintain their strength. Ghost and Storm had been discussing their options during the morning. They could travel north to follow the caribou, but that would mean leaving their territory open to other wolf packs. They could also try to hunt the smaller animals that remained in their area, but such hunting required more energy for less reward. As the afternoon wore on, the pack's hunger became more pressing. The 3 youngest wolves, Frost, River, and Dawn, were beginning to show signs of weakness. Young wolves needed regular meals to maintain their growth, and the failed hunts were taking a toll on their developing bodies. It was Scout who first spotted the opportunity. While following Marcus along the trail, the young male wolf caught the scent of something that made his nose twitch with interest. Somewhere ahead, there was a large animal, possibly injured or sick. Scout signaled to his father with a low whine. Ghost approached and caught the scent as well. It was an elk, and from the smell, it appeared to be alone and possibly wounded. This was exactly the kind of opportunity the pack had been hoping for. But there was a complication. The elk was somewhere ahead of the human on the trail. If the wolves pursued their prey, they would have to reveal themselves to the stranger. The pack's hunting methods require them to spread out and work together, making it impossible to remain hidden. Ghost faced a difficult decision. His pack needed food desperately, but hunting near a human went against every instinct he had developed in his 8 years of life. Humans were dangerous and unpredictable. Even this seemingly peaceful human might react badly to witnessing a wolf hunt. Storm approached her mate and touched his shoulder with her nose. She could sense his internal struggle. As the alpha female, she had equal say in pack decisions, and she believed they should take the risk. The pack's survival was more important than maintaining their distance from one human. The decision was made through the silent communication that long-mated wolves share. Ghost would lead the hunt, but they would try to stay as far from the human as possible while still pursuing their prey. Marcus was unaware of the drama unfolding around him. He continued hiking at his steady pace, enjoying the afternoon sunshine and the beauty of the forest. The trail had become easier, following a gentle downward slope through a valley between two ridges. About 2 miles ahead, a large bull elk stood in a small meadow beside the trail. The animal was old and sick, weakened by an infection that had been draining his strength for weeks. In the normal cycle of nature, he would soon become prey for the predators that kept the ecosystem in balance. The elk's poor condition made him an ideal target for the wolf pack, but his location near the human trail created the problem Ghost was struggling to solve. The elk was too valuable to pass up, yet hunting him would require the pack to expose themselves to the human's presence. As Marcus walked through a particularly dense section of forest, he began to hear sounds ahead that made him pause. There were crashing noises, as if large animals were moving through the underbrush. Mixed with these sounds were others that he couldn't immediately identify. Marcus slowed his pace and moved more carefully. His experience in the wilderness had taught him to be cautious when encountering unknown situations. The sounds ahead could indicate anything from other hikers to dangerous animals. As he rounded a bend in the trail, Marcus saw something that took his breath away. In a meadow about 100 yards ahead, a massive bull elk was surrounded by the wolf pack. The hunt was already in progress, and the wolves were working with the coordinated precision that had made them successful predators for thousands of years. Ghost and Storm were positioning themselves on opposite sides of the elk, while Silver and Scout worked to cut off the animal's escape routes. The 3 younger wolves stayed back, watching and learning from their elders. It was a textbook example of wolf hunting behavior, and Marcus was witnessing it from closer than any human had a right to expect. Marcus immediately stopped and crouched beside a large tree, trying to make himself as invisible as possible. He knew that interfering with a wolf hunt could be dangerous for both him and the animals. This was nature at its most raw and honest, and he felt privileged to witness it. The elk was fighting for his life, using his massive antlers to keep the wolves at bay. But his weakness was evident, and the wolves' strategy was working. They were patient, waiting for the right moment to make their move, while gradually wearing down their prey's resistance. Marcus managed to position his camera and began photographing the hunt. He worked as quietly as possible, using a long lens to capture images without getting closer to the action. What he was documenting was the kind of wildlife behavior that few photographers ever had the chance to record. Ghost was aware of the human's presence, but chose to ignore it. The pack's need for food outweighed his concerns about the stranger. The human had shown no aggressive behavior and seemed content to observe from a distance. As long as he didn't interfere, Ghost would allow him to witness their hunt. The hunt lasted nearly an hour. The wolves displayed incredible patience and teamwork, gradually weakening the elk without taking unnecessary risks. When the end finally came, it was swift and merciful. The old elk's suffering was over, and the pack had secured the food they desperately needed. Marcus watched the entire sequence with a mixture of fascination and deep respect for the natural world. He had seen the harsh reality of wilderness survival, but he had also witnessed the incredible intelligence and cooperation that made wolves such successful predators. After the hunt was complete, the wolves began the process of feeding. There was a clear hierarchy in the pack, with Ghost and Storm eating first, followed by the other adults, and finally the young wolves. It was an ancient ritual that ensured the pack's survival by keeping the breeding pair strong. Marcus remained hidden behind his tree, continuing to photograph when possible, but mostly just observing. He was witnessing behavior that most people would never see, gaining insights into wolf pack dynamics that could only come from direct observation. As the afternoon turned to evening, the wolves finished their meal. They had eaten well for the first time in days, and the pack's mood was noticeably improved. The successful hunt had not only provided necessary nutrition, but had also reinforced their bonds as a family unit. Ghost finally acknowledged Marcus's presence directly. The alpha wolf walked to the edge of the meadow and looked straight at the hidden human. It was a moment of communication across species, a recognition that they had shared something significant. Marcus felt the weight of the wolf's gaze and understood that he was being evaluated. He remained perfectly still, showing the respect and non-aggression that had allowed him to witness the hunt. After a long moment, Ghost turned away, apparently satisfied that the human posed no threat. The pack began to move away from the hunting site, following ancient trails deeper into the forest. But before they left, something unexpected happened. The three young wolves, Frost, River, and Dawn, broke away from the group and approached the area where Marcus was hiding. The young wolves were full of energy and curiosity after their first good meal in days. They seemed drawn to the human who had been peacefully sharing their territory. Storm called to them with a low bark, but they ignored their mother's summons. Frost was the boldest of the three. He walked to within 20 feet of Marcus's hiding place and sat down, studying the strange creature with obvious interest. River and Dawn joined their brother, creating a scene that Marcus knew was unprecedented in wolf-human interactions. For several minutes, the three young wolves sat and stared at Marcus while he remained motionless behind his tree. It was another moment of cross-species communication, a continuation of the connection that had begun that morning when he found them sleeping near his camp. Eventually, Storm's calls became more insistent, and the young wolves reluctantly rejoined their pack. But as they left, each one looked back at Marcus, as if memorizing his appearance for future reference. As darkness began to fall, Marcus was left alone in the meadow with the remains of the hunt. He was overwhelmed by what he had experienced during the day. In less than 24 hours, he had gone from being a lone human in wolf territory to being an accepted observer of pack behavior. Marcus set up his camp in a different location that night, wanting to give the wolves space to return to their kill if needed. As he built his fire and prepared his evening meal, he reflected on the extraordinary day he had experienced. The photographs he had taken would be valuable to wildlife researchers and nature publications. But more important was the insight he had gained into wolf behavior and pack dynamics. He had witnessed the reality of wilderness survival, seeing both the harshness and the beauty of life in the wild. As he settled into his sleeping bag that night, Marcus could hear the wolves howling in the distance. Their voices carried a different tone than the night before, satisfaction and contentment rather than the hunting calls he had heard previously. The pack had eaten well and were secure in their territory. Marcus fell asleep to the sound of their wild song, feeling more connected to the natural world than he had ever felt in his life. He didn't know what the next day would bring, but he hoped his time in wolf territory was far from over. The forest around him settled into the quiet rhythms of night, while somewhere in the darkness, 7 wolves rested with full bellies for the first time in days. The unusual partnership between human and pack had survived its first major test, setting the stage for even more remarkable encounters in the days to come. Marcus woke before dawn to the sound of gentle whimpering nearby. In the dim morning light, he could make out 3 small shapes huddled close to his dying campfire. The young wolves had returned during the night, drawn by the warmth and the strange sense of safety they felt around this peaceful human. This time, Marcus wasn't surprised to find his camping companions. River, Frost, and Dawn had positioned themselves in a semicircle around his fire, close enough to share its warmth but far enough away to escape quickly if needed. They were awake now, watching him with curious yellow eyes as he slowly sat up in his sleeping bag. Marcus smiled softly at the 3 wolves. In just 2 days, what had started as a chance encounter had evolved into something he had never expected. These wild animals seemed to have accepted him as a temporary member of their world, and he felt honored by their trust. The adult wolves were nowhere to be seen, but Marcus knew they were nearby. Ghost and Storm were experienced parents who understood that their young ones were safe with a human who had shown nothing but respect for their pack. Still, they would be watching from the shadows, ready to intervene if necessary. As Marcus quietly prepared his morning coffee, the three young wolves watched his every movement. They seemed fascinated by his daily routines, the way he handled his equipment, the sounds of his camp stove, even the smell of his food. They were learning about humans in a way that few wolves ever had the chance to do. River was the most curious of the three. She had been the first to wake that morning when Marcus found them sleeping near his camp, and she seemed to have appointed herself as the leader of their human-watching activities. While her brothers were content to observe from a distance, River gradually moved closer to Marcus throughout the morning. Marcus had learned not to make sudden movements around the wolves. He worked slowly and deliberately, speaking in soft, gentle tones when he needed to make noise. His years of experience photographing wildlife had taught him how to move in ways that didn't threaten or alarm wild animals. As the morning progressed, Marcus began to pack his gear for another day of hiking. He had originally planned to spend only 5 days in this part of the wilderness, but his encounters with the wolf pack had changed everything. He was documenting behavior that wildlife researchers would find invaluable, and he couldn't bring himself to leave while the wolves were still accepting his presence. The three young wolves seemed to understand that Marcus was preparing to move. They stood up and stretched, then began to move around his campsite in what looked like playful behavior. But Marcus realized they were actually mimicking the pack's preparation rituals before beginning a journey. Frost picked up a stick in his mouth and carried it around the camp, dropping it near Marcus's feet. It was the kind of playful behavior that domestic dogs often showed, but seeing it from a wild wolf was extraordinary. River and Dawn joined in, bringing small objects to Marcus as if offering gifts. Marcus was overwhelmed by these gestures. He understood that the young wolves were trying to communicate with him, to include him in their pack activities. He carefully accepted their gifts, speaking to them in the same gentle tones he would use with friendly dogs. As Marcus shouldered his backpack and prepared to leave, the three young wolves positioned themselves around him as if they were planning to escort him down the trail. This was beyond anything Marcus had imagined when he first set out on his wilderness photography trip. The morning hike became a surreal experience. Marcus walked down the forest trail with 3 wild wolves as his companions, while the rest of the pack followed at a distance. The wolves moved with the easy grace of animals completely at home in their environment, occasionally disappearing into the forest only to reappear further down the trail. Scout and Silver had taken positions ahead of the group, scouting the trail and ensuring there were no dangers. Ghost and Storm followed behind, keeping watch over their entire extended family, including their unexpected human member. The arrangement worked well for several hours. Marcus maintained his steady hiking pace while the wolves explored the forest around him, always returning to check on his progress. It was like having the world's most expert wilderness guides, animals who knew every tree, stream, and game trail in their territory. Around midday, the peaceful journey was interrupted by an unexpected challenge. As Marcus rounded a bend in the trail, he found himself face to face with another human, a hunter who was obviously as surprised to see Marcus as Marcus was to see him. The hunter, a large man in camouflage clothing, was carrying a high-powered rifle and had been tracking what he thought were wolf signs in the area. His presence immediately changed the dynamics of the situation, creating potential danger for both Marcus and the wolf pack. "You need to get out of here right now," the hunter said urgently. "I've been tracking a pack of wolves through this area. They're probably watching us right now, and they could attack at any moment." Marcus looked around quickly. The 3 young wolves had vanished the moment the hunter appeared, disappearing into the forest with the silent speed that only wild animals possessed. The forest seemed empty now, but Marcus knew the pack was still nearby, probably assessing this new threat. "I think you're mistaken," Marcus said carefully, not wanting to reveal his relationship with the wolves. "I've been hiking through here for several days and haven't seen any signs of aggressive animals. The hunter looked at Marcus suspiciously. "You're either very lucky or very naive," he said. "I got authorization to hunt wolves in this area, and I've been tracking this pack for 2 days. They killed an elk somewhere nearby, and fresh kills make predators more dangerous." Marcus felt his heart rate increase. This man represented everything that the wolf pack would naturally fear and avoid. Hunters have been the wolves' primary enemy for generations, and the pack would view this armed human as a serious threat to their survival. "Maybe you should consider that the wolves are just trying to survive," Marcus suggested. "They hunt elk because that's their natural behavior, not because they're dangerous to humans." The hunter shook his head. "Wolves are predators, and predators need to be controlled. There have been too many attacks on livestock in this region, and the authorities want this pack eliminated." As the two men talked, a drama was unfolding in the forest around them. Ghost had immediately recognized the threat posed by the armed human. He had seen hunters before and understood the danger they represented. The alpha wolf was faced with a terrible choice: flee with his pack or try to protect the human who had become part of their extended family. Storm gathered the 3 young wolves and moved them to a safe distance, while Silver and Scout positioned themselves where they could observe the confrontation on the trail. The pack was ready to run if necessary, but they were reluctant to abandon Marcus to face the hunter alone. Marcus tried to convince the hunter to leave the area peacefully. "I'm a wildlife photographer," he explained. "I've been documenting animal behavior in this region, and I haven't encountered any aggressive wolves. Maybe they've moved on to another area." The hunter remained skeptical. "Wildlife photographers," he scoffed. "You people think you understand wild animals, but you don't realize how dangerous they really are. Wolves are efficient killers, and they'll attack humans if they get the chance." As if summoned by the hunter's words, River appeared at the edge of the forest. The young female wolf seemed unable to stay away from Marcus, even in the face of obvious danger. She stood partially hidden behind a large tree, watching the confrontation with obvious concern. The hunter saw the movement and immediately raised his rifle. "There," he shouted. "I told you they were nearby." "Wait." Marcus stepped between the hunter and the spot where River had appeared. "You can't just shoot at animals without being certain they're a threat." The confrontation escalated quickly. The hunter was determined to eliminate what he saw as dangerous predators, while Marcus was equally determined to protect the wolves that had accepted him as a friend. Both men believed they were doing the right thing, but their opposing views created a dangerous standoff. Ghost made his decision. The alpha wolf emerged from the forest and walked slowly toward the 2 humans. He moved with calm confidence, showing no aggression, but making it clear that he was protecting his territory and his pack. The hunter's eyes widened as he saw the large male wolf approaching. "That's the alpha," he whispered. "If I can take him down, the rest of the pack will scatter." Marcus was amazed by Ghost's courage. The wolf was putting himself at risk to protect both his pack and the human who had become part of their world. It was an act of leadership and bravery that demanded respect. "Look at him," Marcus said urgently. "He's not attacking or threatening us. He's just showing that this is his territory. Can't you see the intelligence in his behavior?" The hunter kept his rifle trained on Ghost, but hesitated to shoot. Something about the wolf's calm demeanor made him pause. In his years of hunting, he had never seen a wild wolf behave with such apparent confidence and lack of fear. Ghost stopped about 30 feet from the 2 humans and sat down, much as a domestic dog might do when meeting strangers. It was a gesture of non-aggression that clearly communicated his peaceful intentions. The great wolf looked directly at Marcus, as if asking for his help in resolving the crisis. Marcus seized the opportunity. "This wolf is showing you that he's not a threat," he said to the hunter. "If he wanted to attack, he would have done so already. Instead, he's trying to communicate with us." The standoff continued for several tense minutes. The hunter was clearly struggling with his preconceptions about wolf behavior. Everything he had been taught told him that wolves were dangerous predators that needed to be eliminated. But The evidence before his eyes suggested that these particular wolves were different. Gradually, other members of the pack began to appear at the edges of the forest. Storm, Silver, Scout, and the three young wolves positioned themselves where they could be seen but maintained safe distances. It was a show of pack unity and strength, but it was also a demonstration of their non-aggressive intentions. Marcus continued to talk to the hunter, explaining what he had observed during his time with the wolf pack. He described their intelligence, their family bonds, and their role in maintaining the balance of the forest ecosystem. With each story, the hunter's hostility seemed to diminish slightly. The turning point came when River, the boldest of the young wolves, approached Marcus directly. She walked past Ghost and sat down beside Marcus, looking up at him with obvious affection and trust. The gesture was so clearly friendly that even the hunter could not misinterpret it. "I've never seen anything like this," the hunter admitted, slowly lowering his rifle. "In 20 years of hunting, I've never seen wild wolves behave this way around humans." Marcus seized the moment. "These wolves aren't the dangerous predators you've been told about," he said. "They're intelligent, social animals that are just trying to survive in their natural habitat. They hunt elk and deer, not humans." The hunter looked around at the wolf pack, seeing them with new eyes. Instead of dangerous predators, he was beginning to see a family of wild animals that had somehow learned to trust a human visitor to their territory. "The livestock attacks you mentioned," Marcus continued, "they're probably the work of different wolves, maybe a pack that's been displaced from their territory by human development. These wolves have plenty of natural prey in their domain." Slowly, carefully, the hunter lowered his rifle completely. The immediate danger had passed, but Marcus knew the situation was still fragile. The wrong word or movement could still trigger violence that would be devastating for the wolf pack. Ghost seemed to sense the change in the hunter's attitude. The alpha wolf stood up and walked a few steps closer, then lay down in a gesture of ultimate trust. He was making himself vulnerable to show that he meant no harm to either human. The hunter was clearly moved by the wolf's behavior. "I came here to eliminate dangerous predators," he said quietly, "but I don't think these animals are dangerous at all." Marcus nodded. "They just try to live their lives in the wilderness that's always been their home. They don't want conflict with humans any more than you want conflict with them." The three young wolves, emboldened by the peaceful atmosphere, began to approach the two humans. They moved cautiously, but with obvious curiosity, especially toward Marcus, whom they had already accepted as a friend. The hunter watched in amazement as the young wolves gathered around Marcus. "They really trust you," he said. "How did you manage to gain their acceptance?" Marcus smiled. "I just treated them with respect and showed them I wasn't a threat. Wolves are incredibly intelligent animals. They can tell the difference between a human who means them harm and one who just wants to coexist peacefully." As the afternoon progressed, the hunter found himself drawn into Marcus's world of wildlife observation. He put away his rifle and took out a small camera, wanting to document the extraordinary behavior he was witnessing. The wolf pack gradually relaxed completely, with all 7 members visible and moving freely around the two humans. It was an unprecedented scene of human-wolf interaction, showing what was possible when fear and misunderstanding were replaced by respect and patience. Ghost and Storm demonstrated their parenting skills, gently correcting their young when they became too bold and ensuring the pack maintained appropriate boundaries. Silver and Scout showed their developing maturity as they took on roles as guardians and scouts for the extended group. The 3 youngest wolves, Frost, River, and Dawn, continued to be fascinated by the humans. They played near the campsite, bringing sticks and stones as gifts, and clearly enjoying the attention they received from their unusual pack additions. As evening approached, Marcus prepared his camp for what he hoped would be his last night in the wilderness. The hunter decided to stay as well, wanting to observe more of the pack's behavior before returning to civilization. The 2 men shared stories around their campfire while the wolf pack settled in around them. It was a scene that neither human had ever imagined possible, A peaceful evening in the wilderness shared by humans and wolves in mutual respect and understanding. The hunter, whose name was Jack, had been changed by his encounter with the wolf pack. "I came here to kill these animals," he admitted, "but now I understand that they deserve our protection, not our persecution." Marcus nodded. Most people never get the chance to see wolves as they really are. All they know are the scary stories and misconceptions that have been passed down for generations. As the night deepened, the wolves began their evening howl. But this time, Marcus and Jack were part of the circle, experiencing the ancient song of the wilderness from within the pack, rather than as outsiders listening from afar. The howling continued for nearly an hour, with each wolf adding their voice to the chorus. It was a celebration of pack unity and territorial security, but it was also an acceptance of the two humans who had earned their trust and respect. When morning came, both humans knew their time with the wolf pack was ending. Jack needed to return to report to the authorities that the wolves in this area posed no threat to humans or livestock. Marcus had documented enough extraordinary behavior to fill several research papers and magazine articles. The farewell was emotional for everyone involved. The three young wolves seemed to understand that their human friends were leaving, and they expressed their sadness in the way wolves do, through body language, gentle whines, and affectionate gestures. Ghost and Storm approached both humans one final time, touching them gently with their noses in a gesture of acceptance and friendship. It was a moment of interspecies connection that would remain with Marcus and Jack for the rest of their lives. As the two men packed their gear and prepared to leave the wilderness, the wolf pack gathered to watch their departure. The wolves followed them to the edge of their territory, ensuring their safe passage out of the forest that had been their shared home for several remarkable days. Marcus and Jack hiked out of the wilderness together, both forever changed by their encounter with the wolf pack. They had learned that the relationship between humans and wolves didn't have to be based on fear and conflict. With respect, patience, and understanding, it was possible for the two species to coexist peacefully. The photographs Marcus had taken and the story Jack told to the authorities helped change attitudes toward wolves in the region. The pack was given protected status, ensuring their survival in the wilderness that had always been their home. Years later, Marcus returned to the same area and found evidence that the pack had thrived. New generations of wolves were living freely in the forest, continuing the ancient cycle of wilderness life that had been temporarily interrupted by fear and misunderstanding. The story of the wolf pack and their unusual friendship with two humans became a legend in conservation circles, proving that when humans approach wildlife with respect rather than fear, extraordinary relationships become possible. It was a testament to the intelligence and emotional capacity of wild animals, and to the potential for humans to be protectors rather than destroyers of the natural world. The forest returned to its normal rhythms after the humans left, but the memory of those remarkable days remained part of the pack's collective experience. Ghost and Storm passed the story to their young through the complex communication systems that wolves use, ensuring that future generations would remember the humans who had shown them respect and friendship. In the end, the encounter between Marcus, Jack, and the wolf pack became more than just an extraordinary wildlife experience. It became a symbol of what was possible when fear was replaced by understanding, and when humans chose to see themselves as part of the natural world rather than its masters.